Welcome to the Daily Insider here on Vegas Insider. I am Kevin Rogers, and we get set for today's action, Thursday, January 27, 2022. And Vince Akins will join us coming up in just a few minutes, his Thursday spot here on the Daily Insider to break down the top trends for the two conference championship games coming up on Sunday between the Bengals and the Chiefs, and then the 49ers and the Rams. So we have all of that coming up in just a few minutes. Looking forward to that with Vince. But before we get to that, we want to tell you all about BetMGM. They are the king of sports books, and they are legal in New York now. So if you're in the Empire State, you can now use BetMGM as a legal operator. So that's good for you. And also, some great deals going on through BetMGM. Check out the bonus code VI bonus for a $25 no deposit free casino game plus a 100% deposit match up to $1,000. Enter VI bonus on the BetMGM Sportsbook app to receive a $1,000 risk-free bet for your first wager. And also BetMGM special offer, bet $20 to win $100 in any sport or game, regardless of your wager's outcome. You can check it all out. BetMGM.com. BetMGM, they are the king of sports books. All right, let's bring him on, Vince Akins. Let's do this, Vince. We're down to 4 teams in the NFL. And look, I don't think anybody's surprised it's the Chiefs. Probably a little surprised the Bengals are there. And then you have the Rams, not a shocker. 49ers, maybe a little bit. Before we look at the trend, just quickly, what did you take from this past weekend? I mean, obviously, Bills-Chiefs was the big story, but what else did you take from this past weekend?
Yeah, it was a pretty impressive performance by the underdogs last weekend with 3 of the 4 winning outright and almost the 4th there. Obviously, the Bills easily could have done it as well, not only covering but pulling off the upset win. So I think we talked about last week that those teams that were underdogs last week had performed pretty well as underdogs in recent situations. And, we'll talk about that again a little bit here. But I think we got to the point where there was, 8 or 9 teams in the league that were pretty close in nature. And you saw that in last week's games with 4 close contests, with the underdogs on the road being very competitive, winning three of those 4 games, that those top 8, 9 teams in the league were pretty tightly packed together, and that showed up in last week's games.
Now let's move on to this week. And Cincinnati, they pulled off a big win at Tennessee. I don't really know if we called an upset. It doesn't feel like, when you look at the 2 1 seeds that got bounced, Green Bay and Tennessee, Vince, that it doesn't look like a big upset. Maybe the way the Packers lost. We'll talk about the Niners in a second. But Cincinnati, Burrow gets sacked 9 times. They still find a way to win. They kick 4 field goals. They create 3 turnovers. Now the Bengals, they go to Arrowhead. And the Chiefs, again, 4th straight year in the AFC Championship, looking for their 3rd consecutive Super Bowl appearance off the crazy win over Buffalo, laying 7.5 here in a revenge spot after they lost to the Bengals back in Week 17.
Yeah, certainly an interesting matchup. Obviously, you see the high total there, which we'll get into a little bit. So, as we look at this week's games, obviously, I'm going to cover a lot of angles and some favoring both teams and some favoring overs and unders here. And you can kind of parse through those, as well as I want to cover some of the interesting, unique situations that we find in this weekend. Starting with, mentioned the big spread in this game, the Bengals getting 7.5. It's been 7 parts of this week. So, I want to look at championship round specifically and teams getting this many points. Nothing too interesting here. Teams that are getting 7 or more points in the championship game are 8-6 against the spread, and they've won 3 of those 14 games outright. So nothing too interesting as far as getting all these points, even though you've made the championship game. Those teams have performed slightly better than expected, which might be what you expect. Talking about teams getting points, I mentioned the teams last week in good situations where they had performed well recently, getting points. That includes the Bengals, who are now 6-0-1 against the spread as an underdog of at least 3 points this season. So this is right up there with the biggest line of the season for the Bengals. But impressive showing, winning 5 of those 7 games outright and just the 1 push with 6 covers as a sizable underdog this season. Also noteworthy, a team, the Bengals, usually you think driven by offense, but actually it was maybe more their defensive effort in that 1916 win over Tennessee last week. So just looking at recent history here, this is a small team trend. The Bengals are 5-0 against the spread going back to December of last season when they scored no more than 21 points last game. So the Bengals, a pretty consistent offense this year. I think we have 4 games, so they scored 21 points or less this year, have performed well the next game. Particularly, they've averaged 30 points per game offensively in these games, while scoring at least 24 in every game. So they scored no more than 21 points last week. All 5 of those recent games, they scored at least 24 points in each game while covering and averaging 30 points per contest in those games. So potential for their offense to bounce back a little bit here, particularly in a game where they can be aggressive as a big underdog. That we have seen that for the Bengals. Finally, going the other way now, just a small team trend nugget here for the Bengals as well. Obviously, the 3 Tennessee interceptions in last week's divisional round win were huge for the Bengals. They are just 1-6 against the spread, and actually 6-1 towards the over as well. Since 2018, when they forced at least 3 turnovers last game. So the Bengals not typically near the top of the league as far as turnovers forced. A big game there last week, but they've failed to meet expectations going forward. So a couple different angles there looking against the spread.
Now, go ahead, Vince.
No.
You have more as far as the championship round goes. You want to save those?
Yeah, we can get into the into the total for this game unless there's anything to talk about here. To begin with, for the championship round, a good nugget here. This one goes back 20 years to look in 2001, so just over 20 years. Championship round games are 28, 15, and 1 over under. And just looking back to 2016, 8 and 2 on the over under. So obviously this is going to apply to both games here this weekend. The championship round is when offense has really exploded compared to other playoff weeks, and just in general, that's a 65% over rate over a long span in the championship round. So certainly something to consider. Another thing that's going to cover both games here that we've talked about in the past couple of weeks here in these playoff matchups. Recent playoff matchups. Both these teams have met their opponents here within the last 5 weeks. Cincinnati, we're looking at it here. That was a Week 17 game where they defeated the Chiefs. So going back historically, games are 26-16 in the playoffs when these teams have met within the last 5 weeks. So that's a 62% rate to the over as well. A third little nice over nugget here. Looking at the playoffs, and this is going to apply to both games. We'll talk about in San Francisco as well. Teams are 15-5 over under, so 75% over under in playoffs. This goes back to that long term as well. Coming off a playoff win where they scored less than 20 points, so low scoring. Obviously, both of these teams have games coming off low scoring playoff wins. Where we get to the Niners as well. This one's been active once each of the last 2 seasons. Last year was the Bills going into their game against the Chiefs. That was an over. And 2 years ago, it was Seahawks-Packers that produced an over after a low-scoring playoff win. So a final over-under note for this game, and we're going to go the other way. I realize we end up talking a lot about the Bengals here just because they're a little bit more of an interesting situation. Obviously, really unique situation last week with the 9 sacks allowed in the win. And I think that was the first time since the mid-90s where a team had 9 sacks in a playoff game. So, there's no playoff nugget to look at quite there, particularly when you talk about them winning. But a couple of interesting things here. Just looking at all games in general, and this goes back historically, when a team allowed 9 or more sacks last game, the over-under is 23-37-1. So 62% towards the under. And then when you look at games where a team allowed at least 7 sacks and won the game the last week, that is 16-29 towards the under. So a similar percentage there. So, and you think about that logically, there's some reasoning for that. Maybe that applies this week, maybe it doesn't, but you think about a team, it couldn't protect last week, allowed a lot of sacks, even if they won the game, next week, maybe they play a little more conservative, some shorter passes, protect their quarterback. It's a little bit unique to see that in an AFC championship game, a big offense as a large underdog. So maybe that negates some of those factors, but I think the logic behind that one makes sense when you think about teams play a little more conservatively the next week after getting their quarterback crushed the week before, just in NFL games in general.
Now, the one thing that's kind of interesting to me too, Vince, looking at the Bengals, is they've scored the last 2 weeks. Unfortunately, they haven't scored touchdowns. They have 4 field goals against the Raiders, 4 against the Titans. They had 2 touchdowns against the Raiders, 1 against Tennessee. So you wonder, can they cash in against Kansas City, or is this showing something else that, for as great as Burrow is, if they don't hit the big play with Jamar Chase and some of the other receivers, then there's going to be held to field goals, which obviously we know doesn't cut it against Kansas City.
Yeah, and I think Zach Taylor and the Bengals probably know that, just based on their aggressiveness in that Week 17 game, and even the multiple fourth downs they went for, trying to seal that game away at the end. Obviously, they fell behind early in that matchup with the Chiefs, but I would expect that maybe it says something about what they thought of the Raiders and the Titans, that they were willing to sell for field goals in some situations. But I can't imagine that being the case this week. Obviously, they don't want to put themselves in those fourth down situations, but I would expect the Bengals, as more than touchdown underdogs, to be a little more aggressive if they get to fourth downs in the red zone and near red zone area this week.
Yeah, they have to, because everyone's shown. You saw the Chargers about a month ago, and they kept going for it, because you almost have to against this Chiefs team. We see what kind of big play capabilities they have. All right, the second game, Vince, NFC Championship, 49ers and Rams. All right, we all know San Francisco, they've owned LA of late. They've won 6 straight. They swept the season series again this year. They won in Week 18 to get in the playoffs. Niners, 3 consecutive wins on the road to stay alive, in a sense. The Week 18 win at the Rams, wild card against Dallas, last week against Green Bay. The offense does nothing when they get the block punt, game-winning field goal at the end. LA, though, that big win over Tampa Bay, trying to keep that momentum going after they were dominant for so long, but Tampa Bay made that great comeback. Rams kicked the game-winning field goal. Now LA's got to try to beat San Francisco just once to get to the Super Bowl. What do you have here with the Rams and the Niners?
Yeah, several interesting situations. You mentioned, obviously, for anyone that doesn't know, that the Niners are 6-0 against the Rams the past 3 seasons. That includes 5-1 against the spread in those games. So it's been a nice performance for bettors, and not just overall as well in those games. So I want to talk about a couple of narratives entering this game. The first being, and you hear it all the time, even still in 2021, and I'm sure you're going to hear talking heads talking about this week. It's tough to beat a team for the 3rd consecutive time. In reality, it doesn't happen that often that teams match up. Just looking back the last 20 years plus years of playoffs, 2001 here, there's been 8 such meetings where teams met the 3rd time. It's happened twice in the last 10 seasons. In those games, the team that won the first 2 meetings is 5-3 overall, 3-5 against the spread. So you're kind of splitting right down the middle there. So there's really nothing to the idea that it's tough to beat a team for the 3rd time. At least, A, there's not been that many situations. B, the stats don't really back that out. These teams are familiar. They both have the same level of familiarity with each other. They're making adjustments. I will say a little bit of an edge here. Teams are meeting for the 3rd time on the season. So obviously in the playoffs, divisional foes. The underdog is 16-10 against the spread in those games. So there might be a little something to the idea that, okay, teams are really familiar with each other, playing for the 3rd time a season. The gap tends to shrink maybe a little bit between those teams, and you get some closer games, and you get the underdogs performing a little better than expected. That's something with a little bit of logic that I can get behind there. 16-10 against the spread, not a huge performance, but a nice little edge for the underdogs in these 3rd meetings, regardless of what the first 2 results were. Just a couple of other interesting notes here. So the Rams, obviously, really unique spot. Playing at home here, coming off a road playoff win. Obviously, there's a unique set of factors. You need multiple upsets to be able to host the game after you go on the road in the playoffs and win. So this is the first time since 2008 it's happened. It's only happened twice, going back to 2001. For what that's worth, the teams that are at home are covered both games and are 2-0 on the over. Both those games had 60-plus points scored. So again, not much of a sample size here. We talk about a unique situation, but just something to consider for the Rams. Another kind of similar situation. Teams coming off a playoff win where they committed 4 more turnovers. That's pretty rare. The Rams got away with the last week committing 4 turnovers, but still hanging on against the Bucs. Those teams in their next playoff game are 0-3 against the spread, and all 3 of those games have gone over. So interestingly, those teams, the 3 teams, have committed 7 total turnovers, or averaging more than 2 turnovers per game in the next game as well. And they've allowed 37.7 points in those 3 games. So it's got a small sample size, but you get away with committing a lot of turnovers in the win. If you're sloppy again next week, competition only gets better, it tends to really hurt your defensive performance playing in those spots again, making those turnovers. And then, so we're gonna look at a couple of nuggets on the ATS team side as well before turning to the total here. I mentioned with the Bengals that we talked about them last week against the spread. 49ers, same situation. They are 7-1 against the spread. Just going back to November of last season, 2020, as an underdog, and they're 6-2 outright in those games. Obviously, 3 straight games here, winning as outright underdogs. Week 18, and then the 2 playoff games. So we've seen runs like this in the past, where some playoff teams have gotten hot on the road. Obviously, just last year, the Buccaneers were able to do that, and then they carried it through multiple weeks. Some Giants teams have passed them in that situation as well. So finally, we have a lot of nuggets supporting the 49ers here. Here's one that throws a little bit of water on that. They were able to throw for just 106 yards last week against Green Bay. Obviously, a really low passing performance in that game. That's not a big factor as far as when I looked at it, as far as playoff-wise, teams coming off a win where they didn't throw for very much. But for the 49ers in particular, it's not been a great sign. Go back to 2014 here. 49ers just 2-10 against the spread when they threw for less than 120 yards last game. So maybe some concern here for the 49ers that their passing offense was so poor last week. Obviously, it was cold weather, a little bit of snow, but there were conditions were still there where that 106 yards is not a great indicator for them going forward.
Yeah, and look, the 49ers, well, before I get to the 49ers, I wanted to mention this one, more of like a nugget, not really a trend, but the 2 teams that have played at home coming off the road playoff win. I remember that one in 2008. That was Arizona. They played Philadelphia in the NFC Championship. They had beaten Carolina. I mean, think about how long ago that was. Carolina was a 1 seed. But they beat Carolina with Kurt Warner in the second round pretty handily. And then they got Philadelphia at home, and that was a major high-scoring game. And that got the Cardinals to the Super Bowl against Pittsburgh. I don't remember the other team, but that one, when you put the first since 2008, I was like, that's the one I remember, that the Cardinals had the rare home situation in the playoffs.
Yep, that was definitely one. I don't remember the other one offhand. It happened in the early 2000s. But yeah, you mentioned that was a high-scoring game. The Cardinals and Kurt Warner at the time really lit up the scoreboard in that one. So talking about, if we talk about potentially lighting up the scoreboard here, some nuggets on the total in this game, 46.5, obviously a lot lower than the AFC Championship game. So a couple of those things that I mentioned the first still apply. Obviously, the championship round games going over 65% since 2001, 8 of the last 10, the past 5 seasons going over the total. This one's also obviously a playoff rematch within the last 5 weeks. These teams meeting in the last regular season game, which is interesting to think about now that the Rams could have put the 49ers away with a win in that Week 18 matchup, and now they get them in the NFC Championship game here. Some other nuggets. First of all, I mentioned that teams that scored less than 20 points in a playoff win, 15-5 over under next week. Obviously, that applies to the Niners, but even a little more specifically in that 13-10 win for the 49ers last week. Teams that are coming off a playoff win where they scored less than 16 points are 6-0 over under. So all 6 have gone over, and they've gone over by an average of over 19 points per game. With a team that obviously scored less than 16 points last week, averaging 31.3 points per game in these contests. So you got some big overs with the team that advanced last week with a low-scoring game, really turning the table the next week, interestingly, with some high-scoring games. I believe those teams are 4-2 against the spread in those. So they've despite averaging 31.3 points per game. So you see a completely different game. They've averaged almost 60 points per game in those contests total. And it's sort of a similar fashion. Teams coming off a playoff win where they had less than 15 first downs. 12 of the 15 have gone over the total as well. The 49ers had just 12 first downs last week in that win at Green Bay. Obviously, relied on defense and special teams a lot for that victory. So I'm going to turn to the Rams here for a couple of nuggets here. First of all, obviously, the Rams threw for 355 yards last week versus Tampa. It was a very passing attack-driven game. They are 0-6-1 on the over-under, so 601 push going back to October 2019 when they threw for at least 340 yards last game. So one nugget favoring the under there, but I do have a nice one to close here back on the over. So the Rams had a nice passing attack last week. The counter to that is their running game really struggled with just 73 yards. It wasn't for lack of attempts either, with 30 rushing attempts in the game. So I have a nugget here. Teams that rush for less than 2.68 yards per carry in a playoff win. So you're 2 2/3 yards per carry there, basically. The next week, 18-3 over under. So, the logic behind that is, they were able to get away with a game where they didn't run the ball very well, facing another tough playoff opponent. They maybe realize that's not their strength and turn more towards, you see a little bit of bump in their passing attempts the next game, and that obviously helps favor the over. So a pretty strong 18-3 over under performance as a team that struggled in their yards per carry the last week, but still got away with the win in the playoffs.
A lot of trends, Vince. You really got the shovel out today, didn't you?
Oh yeah, 2 games. It's a lot easier to really dig into the 16. So you can expect expect a good deal for the Super Bowl as well. Yeah, it's obviously I'll say you get 2 games, you get even more time. We have no college football at this point. So you really get time to analyze these games. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes you create a lot of information to sort through. But I think there's some good nuggets here, and there's a lot of other playoff wide factors that we didn't talk about today. There's good opportunities in the playoffs. The NFL playoffs sort of set situation. You get 4 rounds each year. You're looking at just the best teams. You're looking at kind of a consistent set of factors when you look at lines, look at team performance, sort of long term when you're looking at just that subset of playoff teams. So it creates some interesting situations that hopefully we can take advantage of.
So crazy that the 49ers scored 58 points in the 2 wins over the Rams this year, that they really had their way. And Garoppolo, I mean, I get the snow situation now. You don't have weather in LA on Sunday, but how Garoppolo was so bad on Saturday against Green Bay, but he's had good numbers against the Rams. And again, you say, if the Rams win this game, who cares what happened the last 2 meetings? But you look at the 2 underdogs. Burrow already beat the Chiefs, and Garoppolo's beaten the Rams twice. And now you're getting points with the 2 teams that are underdogs that have already won these games.
Yeah, it was obviously just watching that game last week. Interesting, the confidence they showed in Garoppolo. There was points in that game in the second half where, I was left wondering, what does Trey Lance look like? That just his rushing ability isn't enough to get him in the game when they were barely throwing the ball. But Shanahan and the 49ers stuck with Garoppolo and eventually pulled out the win. And now they have a situation this week where hopefully he has a lot of confidence going against the Rams team that he's had success with, and the 49ers have had success against the last 3 seasons.
Vince Akins, great work as always. We're not going to talk to you next week, give you the week off. Then the following week, we'll know the Super Bowl matchup on Monday, but there's no game next Sunday. So when the Super Bowl hits in 2 weeks, we'll have you back on 2 weeks from today to have all your nuggets for the Super Bowl matchup to be determined. But looking forward to it. You can find Vince's picks on Vegas Insider, not only for the NFL, but also the NBA. And you can check out his the Gridiron Angles are done because it's the regular season, but the hoop trends you'll find every day on Vegas Insider for the NBA. Vince, thanks so much for the time. We appreciate it, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Absolutely. You'll have to follow my Twitter and just keep hitting refresh next week, waiting for those Pro Bowl trends. You might not see them right away. Just keep hitting the refresh button, and they'll eventually come. But no, we're going to have a lot of nuggets throughout this weekend coming up to the game, and then through the 2 weeks of Super Bowl prep. And we'll be ready to talk in 2 weeks and be excited for the big game.
SV Breakers, that's where you can find him on Twitter. Vince, thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Good luck.
All right, there is Vince Akins. And, a lot of trends to sort through. And, look, the number with Garoppolo as far as the offense with the 49ers, and they struggled in that first half against the Rams in the last meeting, finished with 316 in the overtime win to get them in the playoffs. And the other win, that's right, they had the 182 and 2 touchdowns, but also Deebo Samuel had a big game. He had a couple of touchdowns in that first meeting. That was the Monday night game. Niners had a pick return on Matthew Stafford. That was when you had questionable Stafford. And that's one thing, too, with Stafford, that he's played well so far in the 2 playoff wins over Arizona and Tampa Bay. Can you do it again? That's the big thing. And again, you're getting either Garoppolo or Stafford in the Super Bowl. It's not a slight to those guys, but one of them will be in the Super Bowl. So whoever makes the least amount of mistakes. I don't think it's about who makes the bigger plays or makes more of the plays. It's more about who makes the least amount of mistakes. And you have fantastic offensive weapons on each side. Cooper Kupp's the top receiver in the NFL. Odell Beckham has 6 touchdowns since coming to the Rams since Cleveland. So he's been excellent. And then you have Deebo Samuel on the other side who can run, he can catch, he can do a lot of stuff. You have Kittle still. There's a lot of guys out there that can make plays in this game. You almost kind of worry about the quarterbacks the most. It's not about the running game or the receivers. Those guys you can count on. It's more about the quarterbacks. So that's what you got to be worried about in that NFC Championship game coming up on Sunday in LA. DraftKings, the championship series, the GOAT. Where is he going to be today? He's still wandering around New York. You know what? The GOAT doesn't ask for directions. He knows where he's going because he's the GOAT. He's wearing the crown, and you can do that too, scoring the seats to the Tournament of Champions. And the Tournament of Champions, DraftKings Championship Series. It's the ultimate competition of contest winners from daily fantasy sports, sportsbook, and casino. The one and only place you can compete in the king of competitions. The best of the best in each domain will compete for series supremacy in their own domain's Tournament of Champions. They'll have one goal in mind: win the ultimate crown and earn the title of the greatest of all time, the GOAT. You know what? The GOAT, again, he's got his own series. He knows how to get around town. He doesn't need your help, but you can wear the crown just like him. DraftKings is legal in New York now, so check it out right now, DraftKings Championship Series, and find them online at DraftKings.com. All right. Little scarce in the NBA tonight because you only have 2 games. We'll talk about that in just a moment. First, want to look back at last night's action inside of the association, and we'll begin with the Hornets. 158 points. They dropped 158 on the Pacers. 158-126 win over Indiana. That's now 3 wins the Hornets have over the Pacers. Indiana's decimated, but that was actually a 2-point game at the half. The Hornets scored 87 in the second half. Only 71 in the first half. But good job there. Charlotte was actually 0-8 with no rest this year going into last night's game after they had lost to Toronto the night before. So you can kill that trend. The Clippers did not have a letdown as they beat the Magic 111-102. They actually came back in that game. It wasn't that big of a deficit, double digits early, but the Clippers ended up winning that game. So the Magic remain terrible at home. It's now 3 wins they have at home this year. And they've beaten, of all those teams, the Bulls, Nuggets, and Jazz are the 3 victories for Orlando at home, who right now they're 3-18 on their home court. I believe it was Denver. Just want to double check. Yeah, it was Denver. But the Clippers end up beating Orlando. So the Clippers now a couple wins there. That's 3 in a row on their East Coast trip, coming back at Philadelphia, coming back at Washington, and beating Orlando. Cavaliers knock off the Bucks 115-99. Cavs were down 9 after the first. Cleveland's still the best story this year in the NBA. They've been unbelievable. Sacramento led Atlanta by 12 after 1, and they got outscored by 29 in the second, 46-17 by the Hawks. I don't even know how that happens. So the Kings were plus 12, minus 3, plus 3 in 3 quarters, and they still lost by 17. Heat take care of the Knicks 110-96, so Miami continues to roll. They were up by 25 going into the fourth before the Knicks made it a little interesting, outscored them by 11 late, but the Heat still win 110-96. James Harden was out for the Nets. Durant's still out. Kyrie couldn't play because the game's in Brooklyn. So the Nuggets ended up rallying past the Nets 124-118 at Barclays Center. Denver outscores Brooklyn 42-26 in the third. That pretty much does it. Fred VanVleet was out again for the Raptors. They lose at Chicago 111-105. That was a game Chicago was in control of. Toronto came back, made it interesting. Falls short of the 218.5, 43 in the fourth. Memphis defeats San Antonio 118-110. That one needed 49 in the fourth. He got 48. And San Antonio had 4 points in the last 4 minutes or so. John Morant was great again, and that game was on pace to go over, but just falls short. It was 228 they combined for. Totals 228.5. Suns end up beating the Jazz in Salt Lake 105-97. funky game because the Suns led by 21 after the first, but Utah outscored Phoenix 30-11 in the second. And then the Suns rather, pulled away in the third, and they got the win. Devin Booker, 16 of 28. He had 43 points. The only good news, the Jazz got Bogdanovich back. They got Conley back. They got Ingles back, but still Donovan Mitchell out, Rudy Gobert out. So that's not going to help the Jazz at all. And Dallas, they topped Portland 132-112. Dallas was on an 8-0 under run this year with no rest. They had lost to Golden State. You can throw that one out the window. 217.5 total. You had 65 in the first, 62 in the second, 65 in the fourth. Pretty much put it away for the over. All right, let's take a look now at the two games inside of the NBA this evening, and we'll begin with the Lakers and the 76ers in Philadelphia. Sixers laying 2.5, Lakers at 24-24, Philly at 28-19. And the Lakers continuing their road trip. They just beat Brooklyn 106-96 on Tuesday. Anthony Davis came back to the lineup. LeBron was great again. So the Lakers now 2-1 on the road trip. Philadelphia, they've won 2 in a row, beating San Antonio and New Orleans. A couple overs there. Sixers and Lakers haven't met this season. Last year, Sixers won both matchups, 107-106 in Philly, 109-101 in LA. But the Sixers, though, they have won now 5 of the past 6 with the Lakers. That really means anything. But the Lakers flipped now to a short underdog after they were favored at Brooklyn 2 nights ago. Minnesota is at Golden State, and the Warriors, off that 130-92 rout of Dallas, they've won 3 straight. Defense has been good during the stretch since getting stunned by Indiana. They've allowed 92, 92, and 103 in the last 3 victories. Golden State just lost at Minnesota 11 days ago, 119-99. Steph Curry didn't play in that game. That game barely finished over the total of 215. Now it's 229.5. Timberwolves won late against Portland on Tuesday, 109-107. That's now 4-1 the last 5. And the only loss came in Atlanta. They melted down to the second half of that one. Minnesota right now 7-2 to the over the last 9. The 2 unders came on totals of 234 and 231. So this one at 229.5. But Minnesota, they've scored a bunch during this 10-game stretch. 136, 122, 119, 125, 141, 135. And understandably, they did some of that against the Thunder, the Rockets, the Pelicans, the Hawks. Not exactly great defenses, but also they scored 136 on Brooklyn. But Minnesota and Golden State, they've split a pair of games this year with the home team winning each time. That's the late game on TNT this evening. Let's look at the Big Ten now, college basketball. Ohio State and Minnesota, big college basketball card tonight. And Ohio State right now laying 6.5 against the Golden Gophers. Buckeyes at 12-4, Gophers at 11-5, and Ohio State actually, their last game took place against IUPUI in a kind of a weird non-conference game, 83-37 win in Columbus. The Buckeyes, though, before that beat Penn State, laying 10. And look, Ohio State, they've been pretty good in conference play. They beat Penn State twice. They took care of Wisconsin. They won at Nebraska. They beat Northwestern, but also they've lost at Wisconsin and lost at Indiana. And now Ohio State going to Minnesota. The Golden Gophers, who had a really good start to the season, they, remember, won at Michigan in December. They, since in Big Ten play, had lost 4 straight before knocking off Rutgers last Saturday, 68-65 as 4.5-point dogs. Their roster a bit decimated, but Minnesota really hasn't been great either against the number. They are just 2-4-1 the last 7 overall since beating Michigan. But Ohio State laying 6.5 on the road. The other Big Ten game to keep an eye on tonight, Purdue and Iowa. They meet in Iowa City. The Boilermakers at 16-3, the Hawkeyes at 14-5. And these teams have, they met back in December. That's right. Purdue ended up winning 77-70 in West Lafayette. Hawkeyes did cover as 14.5-point underdogs, and now Iowa getting 2.5 here at home. Purdue, they are on a 4-1 run since losing to Wisconsin. They beat Penn State, Nebraska, Illinois in overtime, and Northwestern. They did lose to Indiana on the road. Iowa, they had some struggles back in early December. They played better of late. They have won now 7 of 9. They beat Penn State handily. They won at Minnesota. They beat Indiana. But also, they got tripped up at Rutgers, laying 3. And they lost at Wisconsin. But at least the Hawkeyes back at home where they're 11-1. Purdue just 2-2 on the road. They're 6-2 in games away from West Lafayette, but just 2-2 in true road games this season. The final game we'll look at in college basketball, the Pac-12, late night in the Pac-12, the old degenerate special. It is Stanford and USC. Stanford handed USC its first loss of the season earlier this month back in Palo Alto, 75-69. That was after Stanford was on about a 2 or 3 week break, and they came back and beat USC, a 6.5-point home dog, 75-69. The Cardinal, they haven't been bad. They've won 3 of 5 in Pac-12 play. They lost at Washington. They got destroyed by Arizona, but then they just beat Arizona State a few nights ago. USC, since losing to Stanford, they've won 4 of 5. They also lost at home to Oregon, but USC took care of Arizona State by 22. They beat Utah. They beat Colorado. So USC has gotten back on track since they had an 0-3 ATS run. They're 3-0 ATS the last 3. And USC laying 11.5, 8-1 at home. Stanford just 1-4 on the road so far this season. And a ton of Sun Belt, Conference USA, Summit League, the Southland, Colonial, Ohio Valley, Big Sky, WCC, Big West, Atlantic Sun, the Northeast, I should say, not the Northeastern. They're all in action tonight. You can find a game, believe me. There's so many games on the board tonight in college basketball on these Thursday night games. So the Horizon, also a couple games. So you can definitely find something to wager on tonight. I'm not imploring you or forcing you. I'm just saying that there's a lot of games tonight. So you have plenty of choices as far as what you want to take. BetMGM, they're the king of sports books. Legal in New York. Check them out at betmgm.com. And you can use the code VIBONUS for a $25 no deposit free casino game plus a 100% deposit match up to $1,000. Enter VI bonus on the BetMGM Sportsbook app to receive a $1,000 risk-free bet for your first wager. And again, BetMGM now legal in New York. And coming up tomorrow, Louisiana, they are going to be legal with their sports betting. But BetMGM live in New York now and also live in several other states, Arizona, New Jersey, Tennessee, West Virginia, Mississippi, Washington, D.C., Indiana, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Iowa, Virginia, Michigan, Illinois, and Wyoming. And also another offer, BetMGM special offer, bet $20, win $100 on any sport or game, regardless of your wager's outcome. Check them out today at betmgm.com. You know who they are. They are the king of sports books. All right, my thanks to Vince Akins for joining me on the show today to go over the top trends for the weekend in the NFL, Bengals, Chiefs, as well as the Rams and 49ers. And after Sunday, 2 of those teams will advance to Super Bowl 56, and 2 of those will go home. So got a lot to discuss. We'll look more at the games tomorrow, as well as the action for the weekend inside of college basketball and the NBA. I am Kevin Rogers. Thanks a lot for tuning in. We'll talk to you again tomorrow at noon Eastern right here on the Daily Insider. And also, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We would greatly appreciate it as well. And as always, best of luck with your bets.